She sat frozen in the lawyer's office as her father's final words echoed through the room. To my daughter, Sarah, I leave the house. No conditions. Her mother's gasp cut the air like a blade. Her brother leapt from his seat. Her sister's wineglass cracked in her grip. And Sarah? She just sat there, the forgotten daughter, the invisible sibling, now holding the one thing they all thought was theirs. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Sarah Jennings had mastered the art of fading in, not out, in. She wasn't the kind to slam doors or raise her voice at dinner. She didn't throw tantrums when forgotten or demand to be heard. No. Sarah's presence was like the ticking of a clock in a quiet room, always there, but only noticed when everything else fell silent. From childhood, she was the shadow behind her sibling's spotlight. Jack, the golden boy, who could charm a room with a smirk and always had something important to say. Marissa, with her picture-perfect family and a social media following that rivaled local politicians. Sarah, she was the quiet one, the one who remembered to bring the napkins to Thanksgiving, the one who took the phone photos at reunions, then never appeared in any. And yet, she stayed, because someone had to. When their father fell sick, Jack sent flowers. Marissa sent texts. Sarah sent herself. She cooked the meals he could still eat. She cleaned up after the accidents he couldn't help. She sat through the long silences and the late-night ramblings when memory blurred the edges of time. Still, when he passed, no one looked at her as anything more than the caretaker, the one who just happened to be there. At the funeral, Sarah wore navy, not black, not out of rebellion, but because it was the only color her father said brought out her eyes. She stood quietly in the second row while Elaine sobbed into Marissa's shoulder, while Jack gave the eulogy like he hadn't missed 2 birthdays and 3 surgeries. Back at the house, his house, Jack's voice was already echoing through the kitchen walls. If we got the downstairs bathroom, we could boost resale by 10 grand. Easy. Marissa nodded, swirling a glass of red wine she hadn't brought. I'll ask Greg if he knows a contractor. Sarah stood at the window, looking out at the garden she had watered, weeded, fought to keep alive when her father couldn't. The rosebush in the corner still bloomed, just barely, in the last stretch of autumn. No one asked her opinion, no one asked her anything, until the lawyer opened the envelope and read the will aloud. They arrived in polished cars and tailored coats, the kind of entrance reserved for events that demanded control. Elaine Jennings wore pearls too bright for mourning and a silk scarf that fluttered like a flag of authority. Jack strolled in with that arrogant gait that suggested ownership long before anything was signed. Marissa trailed behind, her expression perfectly composed, until the moment would call for tears. Only Sarah sat at the far end of the table, spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap, as if trying to hold herself together one knuckle at a time. The lawyer, a thin man with tired eyes and a voice like dry leaves, began reading without preamble. The will wasn't long. Their father had never been one for flourish, but it had weight. To my daughter Sarah, who never asked for anything but gave everything, I leave the house. No conditions, no division. The words hit like a gunshot in a silent church. Jack jolted upright, his chair scraping the hardwood. That has to be a mistake. Elaine's mouth fell open, her face drained of warmth. She doesn't need it, she hissed. She's not. Not what, Mother? Sarah asked softly, the first word she'd spoken since sitting down. No one answered. The lawyer calmly laid out the facts. The revision had been notarized, witnessed, clear and uncontested, signed 6 months before death. Mr. Jennings was of sound mind, he added, anticipating the protest already rising in Jack's throat. Marissa's voice cracked. He would have told us. Why didn't he say something? Sarah knew why. Because he had. Just not in words they ever listened to. She could still hear his wheezing laughter on the porch, feel the pressure of his hand squeezing hers during long, quiet evenings when the pain got worse. He hadn't needed to say anything. He had seen her. And now, for once, so had the world. The room dissolved into heat and raised voices. Jack paced. Elaine muttered something about manipulation. Marissa dabbed her eyes, caught between grief and disbelief. Sarah sat still. She didn't gloat. She didn't flinch. When it was over, she stepped outside into the cold air, her breath fogging in front of her like smoke from a long-buried fire finally finding oxygen. That night, she drove to the house, the one they all wanted but never lifted a finger to preserve. And with trembling hands, she changed the locks. Click. For the first time in her life, she was the only one with the key. The first knock came early, just after sunrise. Sarah was still barefoot, a cup of coffee warm in her hands, the house silent except for the ticking of the hallway clock that hadn't worked since her father passed. She kept it for the sound, not the time. Jack stood on the porch in a pressed polo and designer sunglasses, too clean for grief. His smile strained at the edges. "Let's talk," he said, voice oiled with charm. "We can figure something out. Share the house. Make it fair." Fair. The word tasted like rust. Sarah didn't step outside. She held the door with one hand, firm and unmoved. Fair? Her voice was low, not bitter, just honest. Like when I slept in that armchair for 3 weeks while you were in Aspen? Or when you cashed Dad's pension and said you'd send something next month? His mouth twitched. A flinch he couldn't hide. The sunglasses didn't mask it. She didn't raise her voice. She just closed the door. Not slammed, just closed. Decisively. 2 days later, another knock. Marissa, in her usual soft pastels, clutched a store-bought pie like it might rewrite history. Her eyes shimmered, not with remorse, but with discomfort. "I didn't mean what I said," she began. "I was just shocked, you know?" Sarah accepted the pie without ceremony. "That's funny," she said, tilting her head, "because I remember every word, every single one." Marissa's lips parted, then closed again. She nodded and left, heels clicking too fast down the steps. Elaine never came, but a note arrived in her curling script, sealed with the same gold crest she used for Christmas cards. It read, "You always were ungrateful." Sarah didn't bother writing back. Instead, she unpacked. She hung the photos her father once took. Landscapes, mostly. Rolling fields, sunsets, the old apple tree before it split in two. She found the letter he left her, tucked between tax forms and utility bills, and framed it above the fireplace. "You are the heart of this home." She planted basil, mint, and thyme in the backyard. Herbs her father had always meant to grow. She painted the living room a soft amber, the way he described once when the light hit just right. She hummed as she worked, laughed when the paint dripped on her sock, and when the neighbors wandered over with casseroles and warm curiosity, she met them at the door, apron on, sleeves rolled, paint smudged on her cheek. "It's nice to finally live here," she said with a smile, and this time she meant live. The months unfolded like petals after frost, slow, uncertain, but inevitable. Spring softened the air around Sarah's home. Vines climbed the fence like they'd finally found permission, and sunlight soaked the wooden porch in gold every morning. Inside, the house breathed again. Not loudly, not with grand declarations, but with the kind of steady rhythm that says, this is a place where someone lives with intention. Jack's lawsuit never stood a chance. The will was airtight. Even the judge seemed annoyed by the waste of court time. The dismissal came in a plain envelope. Sarah read it once, set it on the table, and went back to folding laundry. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply resumed living. No revenge dinners, no pointed social media posts, no cryptic updates. The kitchen stayed warm, the bookshelves full, the porch swept. She planted more herbs, hosted no one, welcomed herself. And yet, some ripples go wider than we expect. One afternoon, as lilacs stirred against the fence and bees moved in lazy loops through the garden, another knock came. It was small, polite, unsure. Marissa's youngest, Jamie, 10, maybe 11, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and uncertainty in his eyes. "Hi," he said, cheeks pink. "I have a school thing, a writing project." Sarah tilted her head. "What kind of project?" He looked down at his shoes, then up again. "We're supposed to write about someone who stood up for themselves." His fingers clenched the edge of his paper. "Mom doesn't really like it when we talk about you, but I remember when you came to Grandma's birthday and nobody saved you a chair. You just stood there." Sarah blinked. He shuffled. "Can I ask you questions?" She stepped outside, crouched to his level. The porch creaked. The light dappled across them like lace. "Of course you can," she said. They sat together, him scribbling notes with a furrowed brow, asking questions in fits and starts. Sarah answered each one, carefully, truthfully, without bitterness. The breeze stirred her hair. Somewhere in the back field, wind chimes rang. And then she felt it. Not a thunderous shift, but something gentler. A redefinition. Because the locks were never about keeping people out. They were about choosing, for the first time, who she let in. And now, sitting on the porch beneath the trees her father once planted, beside a child who saw her not as invisible, but as strong. Sarah realized she wasn't the forgotten one anymore. She was the example.